Thanks, Lucas. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alan Manuel. I'm from Protera. We've been in the business for over 20 years, helping companies migrate and manage their SAP and related systems on the cloud. And recently, we announced that we are offering an expanded portfolio of cloud modernization services to help customers get the most out of their journey, both to the cloud and on the cloud. We've also announced the latest release of our platform called Protera Ariane. I'm extremely happy to be in front of you guys again today. I'm sad that we're not in person. Lee and I have been doing these ASUG conferences for quite a bit virtually, and again, just chomping at the bit to be able to get out there and meet you in person, and looking forward to today's session with Lee. Lee?
Hello, I'm Lee Johnson, SVP and CIO of Tidewater. Tidewater supports the energy sector in the offshore supply vessel area. Tidewater manages about 170 vessels across all the energy areas.
Fantastic. Now, Lee, we're going to be talking, obviously, from the title, we can see about the future of IT in oil and gas, and really looking forward to learning from you what you are doing at Tidewater and how that can be a lesson for those members in the audience who are listening to the recording today. But before we jump into the future, let's start a little bit in the past. Take us back again to the start of your modernization journey. You know, a lot of organizations are really just beginning to dip their toes in that cloud, those cloud waters. What did things look like before your journey began, and what was the reason for you to begin the change?
Yeah, Alan, our journey started in 2014, really at the beginning of the energy sector downturn. And we were looking for an opportunity to how could we optimize our hosting cost. We had SAP in a hosted data center. And so we wanted to evaluate options on if we could get economies of scale or efficiencies and primarily cost efficiencies by migrating this to the cloud. We searched on a couple of different platforms and we chose AWS, and then we did an RFP, and as part of that RFP, Protera won that RFP.
Fantastic. Now, Lee, I work with a lot of customers who are, again, at the beginning of that journey and really stepping into the conversation about moving to cloud centers a lot around the cost savings. But what's interesting about you and your perspective is that when you got to the cloud, you actually did quite a bit more than just focus on that cost savings. Of course, that was an important part. I'm going to now turn to a slide here. I know that you've prepared really to talk about more than just that first move. So tell us a little bit about some of the new services that you found useful. I know moving to the cloud gives you that ability to participate in that wealth of new cloud services. Tell us about some of the things that you chose for your organization, what you were looking to do, and what you got out of it.
Yeah. So one of the key things is that we were able to take advantage of AWS's S3 buckets and actually drive our teams into a paperless environment. So we used that with our apps. And then, of course, we did, AWS has so many different options to leverage. So we also leveraged the pilot light disaster recovery process. We experimented with, vessel and office backups, which was very helpful. Non-SQL databases, serverless architecture. So we were looking for all sorts of different capabilities. And I guess one of the surprises that we got out of this is, we were driving for IT's, kind of a zero IT infrastructure. What was surprising is that we actually save more cost than we realized, because if you start really analyzing it, you find out that a lot of your costs are consultants, software, facilities, and people. And this was when I was at Gulfmark Offshore when we started the cloud journey, and we were able to manage our entire AWS infrastructure with one IT resource.
Wow, that's fantastic. Any other surprises, Lee? That, I know you have a number of services here. Were there any of these that before you made that journey, you maybe weren't aware of what was available, and once you got on the cloud, then that's where your kind of eyes were opened and you realized, hey, that's the one for me.
Yeah, I would say most of them,
Oh.
because at the time we were looking for, it was really about cost efficiencies.
Yeah.
The CFO was looking at how much I was spending on hosting and said, hey, what can we do differently?
Okay.
Right. And we knew SAP was the right tool, so we needed to figure out some of the infrastructure. However, with some of over a period of time, all sorts of new things have come up.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we have cybersecurity solutions.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at using AWS Security Hub and a couple external software vendors teaming with Protera. There's a lot of modernization of how you can manage your servers, your file servers. Instead of having 15 file servers, you can kind of consolidate that for efficiencies. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of releases of software that's out there from AWS, as well as other practitioners that support AWS, and we're continuing the journey of being agile and looking for efficiencies.
Now, it's interestingly, I was having a conversation with another customer just last week, and we were managing his core applications, and he turned to me and said, really what I'm looking for is Protera to help me modernize. Okay, and it's very interesting. There's a ton of new services that are available. One of the areas that we're moving into is helping customers understand, evaluate, and put those technologies into practice, really building around their infrastructure that maybe they initially placed it there with SAP and the related applications, but now they're looking for those new services. So I think just what you've done here, some of the other customers that we're talking to, maybe a little bit behind you, but also looking in the same area to explore and implement some of these new services. Now, Lee, before I move on, I want to ask you, an important part of your modernization strategy is really managing those legacy applications. So often that move to the cloud, you take something, but then you leave something behind.
Right.
And the tendency is really to just kind of leave it there. And so now you have this split kind of infrastructure. What's your approach on that? How did you manage that? And maybe what do you recommend for some of the people that are listening today?
Yeah. So in the energy sector, there's a lot of acquisitions, and a lot of those acquisitions tended to be revenue acquisitions. So they never kind of cleaned up the operational side of it. And that would include IT. And so we have actually been very diligent on removing clutter. And, we have SAP as our prime onshore application. And consequently, when we phase out, we just went through an acquisition between Gulfmark and Tidewater. And so we kind of phased out a lot of applications. As we did that, we also teamed up with Protera. And so some of these legacy applications were phased out. And then we actually kept the data in AWS, and we're using solutions like, QuickSight and Athena to have the data available for historical purposes. And in some cases, somebody from accounting may say, hey, I need this data for the next 10 years. Well, we don't want to keep the application, viable for 10 years. So what we've been able to do is get these very lightweight tools that provide the data, and it can manage. And we've done that several times with Protera, and it's worked extremely well.
I think, Lee, that is a very strong insight. That when you talk about the past, you may not need the application, but you probably need the data.
Right.
So your strategy for modernization has to be put the application where it belongs. Maybe it doesn't belong to be existing anymore, but put that data in a form that maybe the new infrastructure, the new analytics platform, or whatever it may be, can take advantage of it. So I think those who are listening and today thinking about the future, you got the new applications, but for the older stuff, be thinking about the application versus the data. And you may have two different strategies for each of those components.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm going to move to a slide here, Lee, and I want to ask you about a cloud-first organization. Now, when you and I were preparing, we talked a little bit about this. Cloud-first is one of these terms. You hear it quite a bit. You've put it into practice. So from your perspective, why don't we start first with what is a cloud-first organization? What are some of the principles, and then how did you put that into practice?
Yeah. So if you think it from we consider Tidewater a cloud-centric organization. We probably have 85% of our, workloads now being performed in the cloud. And we probably will be in the 95% to almost 99% in the cloud by the end of this year. But so what this does require is a change, right? So it changes the IT practitioners, because we're really focused on that. We have a small IT team, but we need everybody on the team to be in that value creation. And this means it also changes our mindset. Our mindset is, 80% development and value creation and 20%, support. A lot of companies are caught in the 80% support and 20% development, but we really had to focus on that. Some of our people had trouble that they wanted to work on servers, and they went to organizations that's what they did. Our focus was really on that value creation, project management. I show some of the, post-pandemic scenarios, but, being a consultant and partnering with vendors, it's not always building custom solutions. Sometimes you have to do that, but, most of our custom solutions are around a partner like SAP. SAP has the foundation ecosystem, and then we kind of, create applications around that.
Yeah, so Lee, a couple of notes here that I was keeping track of as you were talking. Really, this move to value creation and focus on development, kind of the way I think about it is sort of 3 blocks. The first block is, as you mentioned, if you're not going to be focusing on your operation, kind of the day-to-day stuff, you have to lean on either the technology or partner or both to take care of that. So I think really fundamental to this transformation to a cloud-first organization is the stuff that needs to work reliably on a day-to-day basis works reliably on a day-to-day basis without you having really to pay attention to a lot of it. I think that's kind of the nuts and bolts that if your mind's going to be freed up for the value creation, some of the day-to-day stuff has to be done, and we're glad to partner with you for that. On the second piece, and I hear this from other customers as well, there really is really a hunger or an appetite for organizations to learn the latest technologies to achieve those latest capabilities. And so that really brings into question how to really upskill the existing team. So in that case, I know we've been working with several customers as well as yourself on introducing some new technologies that really are only available on the cloud. So that part 2 is, once the organization has the day-to-day stuff stabilized, is to really begin working on that skill set and mindset change. And then you mentioned this a couple of times. I just want to, emphasize, security. As always, security is paramount. I mean, security has been paramount for anybody in the industry, forever, since the beginning of time. With the new opportunities of cloud, then there's also a new landscape. And so one thing I think is important is that an organization steps back and looks at its overall security posture and determines, hey, what are the policy changes that we may need to have? What are the skills that we may need to change? What are the vendors that we may need to change? And so when it comes to securing all this high value work that your team is now producing, I've seen with other customers, that's a very thoughtful area. So again, I would encourage those of you in the audience who are taking some notes here that you're going to be in this brave new world. You're going to have some great opportunities, but make sure that you put to evaluate your security needs and policies and capabilities as one of those. Okay. All right. I want to dive a little bit more into that development process, Lee, because I do think, and I've heard this from other customers as well, that once you make that move to the cloud, your outlook on how you can deliver value to your end users changes, and you can do some things differently with respect to development. So I'm going to bring up this slide, and I'm going to ask you to talk about at Tidewater, how have you moved Tidewater to really an agile development organization, maybe organizationally, but also from a tooling perspective. Tell us a little bit about kind of what it was before, and now that you're able to take advantage of these tools, kind of what does that workflow look like, or what does that process look like from your perspective?
Right. So if you look at prior to some of the the cloud migrations, everything was kind of customized and somewhat controlled, and we didn't have the availability of some of these tools. Now with the awareness, it radically changes. And I'm going to pick on cybersecurity as one example. So we're teaming with AWS and Protera. And what's different about this now is because we're cloud-centric, the endpoints are all, the server endpoints are all in AWS. And the endpoints for the desktops and laptops and phones are, really now within the Tidewater domain. It's because as we phase out our data centers. This also reduces the attack surface for hackers and also allows us to do economies of scale on solutions and being able to look at some best-in-class solutions in order to, improve our security posture. So I think we've actually gone from a rapid increase in our security posture because we've moved things to the cloud, we've teamed up with larger players, and who they are practitioners. That's what they do. So, Protera, that has the resources and the capabilities of hosting and supporting and patching and backups and all sorts of the infrastructure stuff that is needed. And now they're doing this modernization of how that they can actually create cybersecurity tools. This would not have been possible if we owned our own data centers. It wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago. And now we feel that we're more secure because we were able to take this position and these capabilities, both with AWS and Protera.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that. Thank you. Then I'm going to come back to that security point. It's something I hear echoing over and over that maybe as early as 5 years ago, organizations were still maybe somewhat reluctant to make that move to the cloud. And there was a lot of talk about security and is it secure and is it safe and will my customers accept it? I think really the tone has changed and organizations are looking at how quickly cloud organizations are rolling out new services and capabilities to secure the cloud. And in a certain sense, the evolution of security on the cloud, it's just going a lot faster than most companies can do in their on-premise. So you see kind of the reverse, that security of the cloud is kind of pulling away from what we see with on-prem. And it's simply because they're at scale. They can do things like making sure the latest patches are applied, making sure the latest technology is applied, and some of these kind of day-to-day maintenance activities might fall a bit lower on the priority list when we're talking on-prem. So you see that the future of the cloud is really starting to pull ahead. And Lee, also one thing I wanted to mention is back when you were talking about really dealing with the existing applications and the attack surface, one of the benefits of really getting the data from those prior applications, but maybe decommissioning those applications if they're not relevant, is you're reducing that attack surface and you're putting that infrastructure back on that highly well-maintained cloud. So that's another benefit of really kind of cleaning up. I know
On that point, a lot of those legacy applications or older applications, and it would cost a lot of effort and time and money in order to upgrade them to latest releases of operating system or patches or software. And so they're vulnerable in your data center. They're vulnerable on your premise. And that's why you really have to go with the strategy of moving the data and putting them in a kind of a secured environment where people can have access to those. So this reduces our cybersecurity risk.
Fantastic. Okay, Lee, a couple more questions. I'm just watching the clock here. And by the way, for those who are in the meeting, feel free to type in a question. I know we have some questions coming in already. I'll try to save some time in a couple of minutes for that. I did want to make a mention, Lee, before I give to your last question, just a little bit about Protera. And you've mentioned it. I've mentioned a little bit. Originally we engaged with Lee and Tidewater really just on migrating and managing their SAP. But I think what you can see today is to get the most out of cloud, you really, as a customer, as a client, need to understand all of the cloud modernization capabilities and really what makes sense for your organization. And working with Lee and other customers, Protera is now rolling out a new set of cloud modernization services, really to focus on these areas, to focus on understanding new services, how these services can improve your development process and help you implement a DevOps capability, and really how to secure them. So just want to throw that out there. I know those of you who I've talked with before, we focus mainly on the SAP, but now we're in conjunction with partners like Lee and others, we're moving off out into the broader cloud modernization area, and would love to talk to you guys about that. Okay, Lee, we have a couple minutes left, and I want to save some time for questions, but as always, tell us about the future. So this presentation is about the future of IT, and for many, what you've already done is their future. But tell us about what is your future, what's really next for you and Tidewater.
Yes, so one of our last phases that I mentioned before is that we're looking at phasing out our 2 legacy data centers. That will be done by the end of this quarter, or actually it'll be done at the end of the year. And that's actively in pursuit now, and that is being done by Proterra. And also probably going into next year, we're going to be looking at taking advantage of some of the modernization tools that you kind of referenced to, where we can make, just like we've done before with the cloud and managing, S3 buckets and Glacier. I mean, we did some fancy stuff over the years of going to a serverless architecture. And so we're going to be looking at putting a plan of record for modernization with Proterra and AWS, and how we can take this to the next level.
Fantastic. All right, Lee, a couple of questions here, and if anyone would like to ask additional questions, if we don't get to them, we will we'll follow up via email or some way. We'll make sure to follow up with you. First, it's really kind of stepping back from the technology and looking overall. Lee, one of the amazing accomplishments that you and your organization have done is really achieving a paperless workflow. So this extends well beyond technology into business process, policy, the whole gamut. How long did it take, Lee? How long did it take from the day you said, "Hey, this is what we want to achieve," until the day you put that last piece of paper in the shredder?
Yes, so we that was one of our first objectives, was to do workflow. So that was one of our first apps, and using AWS in 2015. And we were able to do that, and that worked out really well. And then we kind of expanded it across the organization. But I will say for Tidewater, during the Tidewater acquisition, we replaced a manual workflow process, and everything was paper-based and required signatures and all that kind of stuff. We were successfully able to convert that and go live with that almost on day one of when we implemented SAP. And everybody loved it. From a development standpoint, it probably took us, probably 3 months maybe to develop it. And now we have a workflow that ties in everything. We use it for privileged access. We use it for expense reports. We everything that a user would need to approve, it now gets approved in a centralized centralized workflow process. So it's all electronic, 24/7 capability, mobile devices, as well as desktop and laptops, iPads, and it actually supports a lot of functions beyond just financial workflow and delegation of authority, and it uses the org structure, the organizational structure.
Fantastic. And I mean, this goes without saying now, we're still in the pandemic, and many of us are still in this hybrid sort of work from home, work from out of the office environment. Yeah. And the ability to do away with paper really just means the business can even continue to run. I know we talked about that earlier, but really the conjunction of the efficiencies and the automation, as well as just the access, is something that I think has been a great benefit to you. Lee, another question came in here about those legacy applications. How is it that you determined which applications couldn't or shouldn't be moved to the cloud? Any kind of rules of thumb for the audience here on that one?
Yeah, so this is always a challenge, because what happens is legacy applications usually have support in the organization. So sometimes that there's reluctance to eliminate some of these applications. What we really did is we did it based on like almost a business case. And if the system was not creating value, we got rid of it, no matter what the expense. Some expenses were fairly high for support of the application. Others were kind of minimal, but our objective was to get rid of clutter. if you have an application and it's not creating value in your organization, it's incumbent on you to get rid of that application. And we do that at the executive level, just so that there's less conflict. So we have almost a campaign of what we say is get rid of the clutter. Just like on the paperless side,
Yep.
when we got rid of the clutter, we got rid of the filing cabinets, and we turned the filing cabinet room into a conference room. So you almost have to have that kind of campaign of you drive for, simplicity and efficiency.
Lee, a colleague of mine in the non-work context, mentioned an organizational book I think she was reading, and it comes to mind today. It's basically, get rid of the things that don't bring you joy. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing. If the application isn't something that you want to bring forward, regardless of what it's actually costing you, it's going to cost you a lot in the mind to be maintaining that. All right, we got 2 minutes. Last question, Lee. You are experimenting and not experimenting. You are adopting some of the much more advanced capabilities like RPA, some automations. You're kind of at the cutting edge of that. Some of the things that we talk about, and not every customer is there yet. How much of your mind, I guess, how much of your attention is focused on those advanced things, technologies and capabilities versus maybe the core of what you're doing today?
Well, so one of our key priorities is efficiencies and scalability, and of course, cost savings. Now, so we've experimented with RPA, chatbots. We're looking at all sorts of different areas of, hey, how can we accelerate, our capabilities? So I know AWS has some machine learning. We haven't experimented with that, but we're looking at all sorts of different capabilities. Our theme is to make it as efficient as possible. And because of that, we have a very lightweight, footprint across the area. We think we're probably the most efficient vessel company in our sector. We've for the past 10 quarters, we reduced G&A. And we're cash flow positive, which is, kind of a bold statement for energy in our sector, in the OSV sector.
Fantastic. I know we're out of time now. Looking forward to really furthering the conversation, hopefully in person at an ASUG event soon. Lee Johnson, SVP and CIO at Tidewater, thanks so much, as always, for continuing this conversation and the cloud modernization journey. I'm Alan Manuel from Protera. You have our contact information up here, and would love to further continue this conversation offline or in another context with anyone who has further questions. Thanks so much, and back to you, Lucas.